Grace, good to see you all here. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Pastor Jeff. I have the privilege of serving the body here at Grace as the associate pastor. And I'll be in the back after the service. I would love to meet you and talk to you and just hear about what God's doing in your life. So come say hi to me after the service. Well, we're going to be in the book of Habakkuk this morning. If you want to turn there, we'll be in chapter 1. Who here has read through Habakkuk before? Anybody? Okay. How about before this week when you knew it was coming up? That's the bigger question. Yeah. It's a short book. You could read through it probably in one sitting pretty easily. But it's a powerful book. And as we begin our study of some of the minor prophets, or the book of the 12, as we called it last week, we have some powerful reminders and some really hard questions that we need to ask, that we see asked here in the text. I don't think I have to do much convincing of all of you to say that the world is a troubled place right now. We look around us and we see war, we see struggle, we see those who are weak being trampled down, and we see those who are strong continue to get stronger. We see those who are unrighteous, those who are not following the Lord, being raised up, and we see those who are serving the Lord faithfully being put down. It seems backwards, doesn't it? It seems imbalanced. And we have this sense of injustice when we look around at the world. Am I alone in that? Y'all see it too? Well, people from all walks of life, especially those who call themselves children of God, they've been asking some of these major questions throughout all of human history. And it's these two questions. One, will there be justice against evil? And number two, will there be mercy for the faithful? So those ideas of justice and mercy. So today we're going to look at the first part of Habakkuk 1, just verses 1 through 11. And really, Habakkuk is wrestling with the overall question of what does God have to do with those two questions? Or to put it more simply, is God just? Is he just? See, thousands of years ago, this man, Habakkuk, was asking those same questions, and he knew the same God that we do. Did he get an answer? If so, what was that answer? And how can we listen to God the same way that Habakkuk did? You know, as well as I do, that God has not remained silent on these issues, on these questions. He's given us his word, his enduring word. It doesn't just tell us a bunch of myths or fairy tales, stories to make us feel better about ourselves or to give us concepts about how to live a good life. No, he has authored an autobiography. He has told us who he is and how things will work out the way that he has designed them to work out, how he has ordered them. My prayer this morning is that by looking at his word, he's going to transform our hearts and minds to see things his way, to work our way through these hard questions. We really need to lean on the Lord's goodness in his word this morning if we're going to have any hope as we live in this world. So before we jump into Habakkuk, I think it'll be helpful for us to consider some of the greater context of the book this morning. If you weren't here last week, Pastor Luke did a great job of just introducing us to the book of the 12. he was tracing some of the themes that we find throughout all of the book of the 12, the writing of these prophets. And he gave us 2 signposts to look for as we work our way through these specific books of Habakkuk and then Malachi afterwards. Do you remember what those 2 signposts are? It was exile and return, right? We should be seeing hints of those 2 ideas, those 2 concepts as we work through each book. There is some judgment through exile coming for the nation of Israel in the near future of when they were writing. But the prophets that are speaking, they never stop there. They were continually looking forward to the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord when Jesus will return to judge the nations and to make all things new. And that day is still in our future too. It's still coming. That's what we look forward to. We also saw this continual theme of gathering or returning that we're going to see in each book of the 12, so we want to keep our eyes open for that as well. And so we should be asking as we study Habakkuk now, what does God want to focus our attention on? We want to keep our eyes on the text and say, okay, first, where does the original audience fit into God's great scheme or plan of redemption? Where do they fall into that? And then we can ask the same thing about ourselves. Where do we fall into that? Where are we at in God's redemption plan? And that's really where we have to start. First and foremost, we must remember that we are part of God's great story, not the other way around. You see how important that is? He is the main character. He is the only one powerful enough to hold all of the different strings of history together without it becoming a mess. And he's given us brains and a will and emotions. He's made us in his image. Yet we are finite. We can't hold everything together. If we had anything resembling the job that God does, we would absolutely make a mess of everything. Take your own lives as an example. It's hard enough to keep our own lives from becoming a mess, from them imploding without the Lord's help. Just imagine that times, 8 billion? God is the only one powerful enough to hold it together. We can't run the world, and I don't think we would want to if God stepped away from his job. So keep that in mind. God is directing all of history, and the end towards which we are heading is, in one sense, what we mentioned last week, the gathering of all God's people to himself. That's where we're headed. That's what we can be excited about and think about even as we're looking at this specific point in history. So let's see how this plays out with Habakkuk. And we don't really get a whole ton of information about this guy, okay? We see in verse 1 that he's a prophet. And a little bit of history, if we look at other sources, it's likely that Habakkuk was serving as a prophet during the last days of the kingdom of Judah. He was probably a contemporary of Daniel, Ezekiel, Zephaniah, and Jeremiah, other prophets during that time. Now, the temple and Jerusalem itself had not fallen yet. That was a little bit further in the future. It was foreseen by some of the prophets, but it hadn't happened yet. The Assyrians are the ones that had been the predominant power during the time and were causing some of the conflict that was happening in Judah. But as we will see, God is going to start raising up another world power to take their place. It's going to be the Babylonians, and they show up in Habakkuk. Then as far as the structure of the book goes, it's a little unique, especially when we look at the other books in the book of the 12. It's going to look a little differently. Habakkuk is different because the typical structure for some of these prophetic books, maybe you're familiar with it, is kind of starts with this is the word of the Lord, a prophet saying this is what the Lord is saying, and then he proceeds to tell his audience what that word is. But Habakkuk, we're still hearing from a prophet, but it starts a little differently. It actually starts with a prayer. Habakkuk is not addressing a human audience. He's actually addressing a divine audience. He's talking directly to God. And as we're going to see as we work through the book, we have the distinct privilege of eavesdropping on a back and forth conversation between a mere human and the God of the universe. That's pretty incredible, right? Now, thinking about that back and forth dialogue, it actually brought into remembrance for me in my mind another book where this happens, the book of Job. Any of you read through Job or spent much time in it? Something similar happens. If you remember what happens in that narrative, the beginning, Satan comes before God, and what does God say? Have you seen my servant Job? How he is faultless in the way that he's living for me. And then Satan says, yeah, it's because he has it good, right? He's got the good life. You take those things away, and he'll start to curse you. So God allows him to take those things away, and even to the point where his family is taken away and his very health is taken away. There's a theme there of God allowing these bad things to happen in Job's life, but ultimately he's got a greater purpose. Keep that in mind, even as we think about Habakkuk. But at the end, if you'll remember, Job comes to question God. He's asking these questions. And what does God do? He actually talks back, right? He dialogues with little old Job and puts him in his place. Job goes through this humbling experience as God tells him who's really in control and causes Job to think less of himself and more of God. There's a humbling that happens to Job, and we're going to see a similar response to Habakkuk as we continue to work through the book. We'll see that in a few weeks as we get into the later chapters. But for now, let's focus on the text in front of us. There's really only two sections that we're going to cover today. First is Habakkuk's first complaint in verses 1 through 4. And then, secondly, we're going to have God's first response. That's in verses 5 through 11, okay? So we're going to begin with the complaint. Habakkuk's first words in talking to God, he's going to ask, how long? How long? Let's read the first 4 verses here. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted. Let's look at the first part of Habakkuk's prayer here. Notice Habakkuk is addressing God directly, so he knows him. There's a relationship there. He is no stranger to God and his ways. In fact, he calls God by his covenant name, Yahweh. Now, it's not there on the screen, but maybe in your Bibles you see all capitals Lord. That's a marker, a hint to us that it's using God's covenant name of Yahweh. So Habakkuk is asking some hard questions here, but he's still being reverent towards God. He's not blaspheming God. He's not deriding him. He's being reverent. He's calling him by his covenant-keeping name, identifying God as the one who keeps his promises to his people. That's important. And I think that might be at least in part why Habakkuk is distraught. You can hear his pain there in verse 2. God, how long shall I cry for help? He's crying out because he knows he needs help. He's saying, I thought you had our backs, God. There is violence towards your people. Your people are surrounded by it. We're being hurt and killed. We're constantly on the move. And Habakkuk is asking God for help. That's really significant there. In his pain, he's not turning away from God, but he's actually turning to God. He's turning to the only one that he knows can actually help him in this pain. Now, is that your gut response when things are starting to fall apart in your life? When things start to turn into chaos in your life? When you're feeling the pain of other people in this world or just the circumstances that you're going through? Do you go first to ask God for help? Or are you listening to the advice of someone else? Not saying that that's wrong, okay? God has hopefully given you some wise people in your life, but it's a matter of priority. Who do you go to first? Going and listening to somebody, a trusted voice in your life that may or may not have the right advice for you? Or are you getting on your knees saying, God, I'm crying out to you. Please help me, because you know what he knows. Or maybe you'd rather not ask anybody for help because you think you can fix it on your own. Your first inclination, your gut reaction to say, okay, I'm just going to bear down. I got this. I'm gonna work harder at this. I'm gonna fix this. You're a fixer. Is that you? Well, Habakkuk here knows the right source to go to immediately. And he also seems like he's been going to that right source over and over again. How long, he's saying how long, implies that this isn't the first time that he's been asking God for help. He's been asking over and over again. And what's his complaint to God? Look here again. How long shall I cry for help and you will not hear, or cry violence and you will not save? He's saying, God, you're not listening. You're not listening to me. You're not doing anything to save us. So in other words, Habakkuk's perspective is placed solely on his circumstances, on what's going on in his life. Nothing is changing. Because salvation hasn't come for him or his people, he assumes that God is just ignoring him. He's not answering him. Now, this sounds pretty similar to another passage. If you want to turn there, you can. It's going to be Psalm 13, but I'll have it here on the screen too. Listen to these words from David, because I think Habakkuk is echoing David's heart here as well. David says, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow? Hear that same pain? Sorrow in my heart all the day. How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? So both men are in the midst of intense suffering, particularly from an enemy. And they're questioning if God is present, if he's hearing them as they are enduring this attack from their enemies. They're hurting, both physically and emotionally, and maybe, probably more so, because of the apparent disregard that their God is showing them. Well, let's keep digging here. Verse 3 has this striking accusation. Why do you make me see iniquity? And why do you idly look at wrong? It's a strong, very strong statement. He's saying, you, God, are seeing wrongdoing and you are idle. You don't do anything. And if that weren't bad enough, you're making me look at it too. You're making me look at iniquity, the sin. Habakkuk, I think, is rightfully, he's sick of looking at the persecution he and his people are facing. And he's actually got pretty good theology. He knows who God is. He knows that he's holy. He knows that he cannot endure any sin in his presence. He cannot let any sin go unpunished. So, what Habakkuk sees around him, it's just not computing with what he knows about God. Can you relate to him in that way? We know who God is. We know he's holy. And yet we're surrounded by injustice. We're surrounded by iniquity. Habakkuk says that destruction, and then again, that word violence are going on. So murder, theft, slander, all sorts of heinous acts are going on in Judah at this time. And what is that causing? It's causing strife and contention, broken relationships among God's people. And Habakkuk is saying, you're telling me that you're not going to do anything about this, God? What is going on? Why aren't you doing anything? And then in verse 4, we see that Habakkuk is going to make his own conclusions based on these emotions that he's feeling. He says, the law is paralyzed. In other words, your good law is not accomplishing its purpose. Justice is not being served. The wicked are just getting off scotch-free, while the righteous are getting punished. And then he goes a step further. Listen to this language. Justice is being perverted. It goes forth perverted. He's saying this is so backwards from what I know you intended, God, when you created everything. It's twisted. It's not fair. It's just not fair. It's the opposite of what you promised. And let me just ask you, stop here and ask you, do you lament the same way that Habakkuk does when you look out and see the ways of the world? We can look out and say things are not the way that they should be. The way things are ordered, the way things work, it's just off. It's off in some way. We know this much is true, that our world does not work as God originally intended it to work. There should be this groaning in our souls to see God's original creation restored. And if you're lamenting that today, you are not alone, especially when we see what some other authors, especially in the Old Testament, are pointing out as they look at the world. Just a couple places that I found that I want to read to you. Job, that I mentioned earlier, chapter 21, verse 7, he says, why do the wicked live, reach old age, and grow mighty in power? The wicked are growing mighty in power. That shouldn't be. Another prophet, Jeremiah, chapter 12, verse 1 says, why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all who are treacherous thrive? Doesn't make sense. And then another psalm, Psalm 73, maybe some of you know this one. The author says, I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no pangs until death. Their bodies are fat and sleek. They are not in trouble as others are. They are not stricken like the rest of mankind. And that's ultimately Habakkuk's complaint here. That's his prayer to God. Why, God, have you, the just one, allowed the wicked to prosper? That should not be. Well, in the next section, what we get is God's response. This is ultimately his response. Look and be astounded. Let's look at verses 5 through 11. We'll work our way through here. This is the Lord's answer to Habakkuk. Look among the nations and see. Wonder and be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. Let's just stop there, not move past that too quickly, and get this in our brains. Allow the word to show us this, that God is responding to Habakkuk. He's not silent. He's actually taking care and delighting in Habakkuk enough to give him a response. So he was listening when Habakkuk was praying. Habakkuk was actually wrong. God wasn't ignoring him. He was listening. And now he's showing him the grace of responding to him. Oh, guys, this is amazing how gracious God is, that the creator of all things, the superpower of the entire cosmos, would stoop down and hear the meek voices of humans. I gotta thank Justin for his reminder. Every time he prays, have you noticed what he says? Most of the time. He says, Father, bend down and hear our voices. What a great reminder that is. That the God of the universe is bending down to hear his children speak. And here Habakkuk, he's poured out his heart to God, and he is now gifted with hearing the voice of God. So what does he hear? Verse 5 again, God says, look and be astounded. Wonder at what I'm about to tell and show you. Whatever you had in your mind before, Habakkuk, buckle up because I'm about to blow that out of the water. He was going to hear something that would astound him and completely upend his expectations. This reminded me of something that happened when I was a kid. I have a famous video in my family of my 5th birthday party, okay? Still on VHS. Now, you guys probably don't even know what that is. Okay, but every once in a while when my family gets together, we've popped that video in just to be reminded, one, of how things used to be when I was younger, get some nostalgia going on. But there were some funny things that happened in that video, and particularly it happened around present time. Okay, when I was getting my presents from my friends. Okay, I had these ideas of what I might get, what I had asked my parents for. Maybe they passed it along to my friends. But there's one moment where I was expecting to get a present, and I open it up, rip it open, and you can see the astonishment on my face. Because when I looked down, the present that I just received from one of my friends is one of the presents that I just got from my parents not too long ago. Okay? I was expecting something new, something exciting, and that's This is just a copy. This is the same thing that I just got. So I turn to the person that gave me this present, and I'm about to blurt out, oh, I already have this. Or, you can take this back. I already got one of these. And my mom notices the astonishment on my face, and she bolts from the other side of the room and just gives me a little whisper. That's all you can see on the video. But she was telling me, you better watch your words. You better be thankful for this. So all you can hear on the video is, oh, sorry. Thank you, Faith. I appreciate it. My attitude had to change real quick. And it's because, again, I was expecting something different, and I got the same thing. Maybe that didn't happen to you when you were 5 years old or at a birthday party, but have you ever had an expectation of something you were going to receive and then get something totally different? Has that happened to you before? Now, how did you respond when those expectations weren't met? My 5-year-old self, I'd like to say my responses have changed a whole lot. But a lot of times when my expectations of what I want or think I deserve, when those expectations aren't met, usually my heart gears towards disdain or disappointment. There's this big letdown in my heart. Can you sympathize with me there a little bit? See, we have our own agenda for how we think things are going to work out, of seeing our best possible outcome for our lives, and then we sigh in our souls when those things don't come to pass. But you know what? God is actually so gracious to us when he disappoints us. If we always got our way, if things happened the exact way that we expected, we would be a sad people, indeed. We'd be sad versions of ourselves. But God, in his goodness, wants something better for us. I know how he frees us from these puny ideas of what our lives could be or how we think our best future will play out. And he frees us by doing this. He shows us his ideas for the future. He shows us his great plan for all of history and then invites us to join in on that. Now, what is that? What is his great plan? What is all of history moving or going towards under the direction of God's hand? Turn over to Habakkuk 2:14. We're gonna cheat a little bit and look ahead in Habakkuk. But this is where history is headed. This is God's purpose for all of history. Chapter 2, verse 14 says, "For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." Picture that, the waters covering the sea. Is there any dry spot that you can see when looking out at the ocean? No, it's completely covered by water. That's all you can see when you look out. And oh, how we should long for this to happen, that the whole earth would be filled with the knowledge of God's glory. And that our lives would be poured out in worship of this great, glorious God, so much so that we would be utterly just astounded by his holiness, his goodness, his glory. And then, because we're astounded, we would beg and plead for others to join in and see his glory as well. The whole earth be covered with the knowledge of his glory. You see, that's what the Lord was telling Habakkuk that he was doing. He was doing a work in Habakkuk's days. He was not idle, as Habakkuk assumed. He was doing things, he was preparing things that Habakkuk couldn't even dream of. In fact, he tells Habakkuk here, I'm going to do this work in your days that you would not believe if I told. And then what does he do? He tells him. He tells him what he's going to do. He's still not going to believe it. You see, God is altogether wonderful and powerful and mighty and beyond our comprehension. We read this before I came up, but Isaiah tells us God's thoughts are not our thoughts. His ways are not our ways. If God tried to place even a small portion of his ways in our minds, we would turn to mush. We couldn't understand his ways. So every human being should just stand before God, their jaws dropped, bewildered, dumbfounded at God's magnificence and at his will being worked out, and his sovereign will being worked out. So let's look to the next verse, verse 6. How does God describe his will being worked out? Again, it's not at all how Habakkuk expected it to be. He says, I am raising up the Chaldeans. Now this is another name for, anybody know? Babylon. I kind of let the cat out of the bag earlier. But yeah, this is Chaldeans, Babylonians, they're the same people. God says he's going to raise up a wicked nation to replace the other wicked nation, the Assyrians. And this new wicked nation is going to further decimate the people of Israel. I don't think that's what Habakkuk expected. I don't think that's how Habakkuk expected to be astounded, right? He was probably saying, excuse me, what was that, God? How's that going to work? Where is your salvation in that plan? And I think there's a reason we're only going over Habakkuk's first complaint this morning because he's got another one coming, okay? He just doesn't understand God's ways. And you know what? That's exactly what we should expect, for there to be a lack of understanding because God's ways are so high above his. Well, the rest of this section is just going to go on to describe this nation, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, that God will use to execute his plan. Verse 6, they are bitter and hasty. They seize things that are not theirs. They have this form of justice in verse 7, form of justice and dignity that is made up. It is their own. It goes forth from themselves, as the verse says. So it's not coming from God's version of justice and dignity. It also says they have incredible military might here. Their horses and horsemen are described like these other animals, a swift leopard, a fierce wolf, the flying, soaring eagle. Gives this idea that they move in, they take out the enemy, lightning fast. Nothing can stand in their way. And again, if we see in verse 9, that word violence is used again. They are ruthless. They are brutal in the way that they deal with the nations they're warring with. And it says in verse 9, they gather captives like sand, so they take an innumerable amount of prisoners. They're unmerciful in that way. So we have to ask, who could stand against such a power as this? Who could stand against them? Well, apparently not any of the kings that they're facing. Look at verse 10. At kings they scoff, at rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress. So no king is seen as a threat to the Babylonians here. They get laughed at by Babylon because they're able to overcome these powers. They're able to overcome any fortress that is built against them like they're nothing. Nothing can stand against them. And then they're described as this sweeping wind. They sweep through other cities, other kingdoms like the wind, just going through, leveling cities and kingdoms. What a terrible force that God is describing here. And yet, look at verse 11. Again, just the reminder of who's really in control here. Because of their pride in having this might, what does God call them? He calls them guilty men. Guilty men. So who decides who's guilty and who's innocent? It's still God, right? Habakkuk is complaining. He's not seeing this justice, but that doesn't mean somebody else has replaced God as the one who gets to decide who's guilty and innocent. God is still deciding this. He's the judge of all. See, they are worshiping the God of their might instead of worshiping the almighty God who is over all nations. That's their downfall. That's their guilt here. And it's here at the end of the passage. I want to return to those original questions that we asked at the beginning of our time together. Will there be justice against evil? And will there be mercy for the faithful? You see, God's answer to us through his word is a resounding yes to both of those questions. God in his holiness will not allow evil to prevail. He will not let the cruelty and violence and sinfulness of bitter, hasty, guilty men go unpunished. But probably will not go down the way that you think it will. The way that you would plan it out if it was up to you. You see, along the way, God will take what men mean for evil and turn it into good. In his timing, in his perfect timing, the Lord will mete out all of his justice to those that deserve it. The time is going to come where all people, the righteous and the unrighteous, will meet the judge of the universe and answer for their actions. That is a guarantee. That's happening. It's coming. And it's precisely at that juncture, when we think about that juncture in the history of time, when we feel the weight of that coming day of the Lord, that we remember that the greatest injustice in all history, it's not happening to us right now. It wasn't happening to Habakkuk and his people during his time. But who did it happen to? It happened to the spotless one. The one in whom there was no sin. The one who was the most undeserving of God's punishment. And if anyone deserved to cry out, "How long, O Lord?" because of the unjust cruelty he saw all around him, it was him. It was Jesus. But did he cry out? Did he cry out when these cruel, ruthless men were attacking him? No. He was silent. He took the punishment for sins that were not his upon himself willingly. That's where the mercy of God comes in. In the unfathomable wisdom of God, justice and mercy met at the cross. Jesus Christ took on flesh to take on our judgment so that the judge of all the universe can now become our Father, the one that loves us. So brothers and sisters, be humbled by this. We just celebrated it at the table. But remember that the Lamb of God, Jesus Christ, was slaughtered to purchase your freedom from God's judgment. His faithfulness to that end is now your righteousness if you're trusting in his finished work today. Romans 3 reminds us God has become both the just and the justifier to you who place your faith in Jesus. And because of this reality, guess what? We can expect God to do the unexpected in the way that he's working out his perfect will. It's easy to get frustrated when we look out and see the injustice in the world. When we see the apparent success of the wicked, just like Habakkuk did. But we can rest in God's perfect timing and trust that he is now and will be just. And he'll continue to be merciful to us, his children. Let's thank him for that as we pray. Oh God, you are the just one. You're the one who holds the universe in your hands. You alone have the wisdom